I speak to you in the name of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. We sometimes have kind of a romanticized notion about Jesus' healing miracles. In our minds, we can set these miracles apart as demonstrations of God's power that are very different from our everyday lives. Almost as if these healings of Jesus are one-offs or rarefied, isolated events in some extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily faithful person's life, but not something that shows up daily in our ordinary human existence. The truth is, God's grace and healing power extends to all people, in all places. And God's healing power is not reserved solely for the lucky few, but for all those who believe and engage in God's work in the world. And today's gospel is a perfect example of this. In Luke's gospel, Jesus' healings often take place in liminal, in-between spaces. Either Jesus is leaving one town and entering another, or he's leaving one house and on his way to another. Or in today's gospel story, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem and is literally in between, in the region between Samaria and Galilee. We've talked before about the religiously, politically, and ethnically fraught relationship between the Samaritans and the Judeans in Galilee. Atrocities were committed by both people over generations against one another. And this region, between the two areas and the two peoples, Jerusalem and Samaria, where today's healing takes place, this space is literally right in the middle of that conflict. It's not too much of a stretch for us to imagine Jesus situated in some of our modern-day politically, religiously, or socially complicated border spaces. Whether it's the US-Mexico border, or the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, or Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, or the wall that separates Jerusalem from Bethlehem. Jesus is not in Samaria, nor is he in Galilee. He is uncomfortably in between. I say uncomfortable because in these in-between spaces, you both literally and figuratively have no idea where you stand. And that can feel like a very vulnerable place to be in. Because all of the normal boundaries that we try to place in our relationships with other people, whether political or geographical or religious boundaries, social boundaries, who is in, who is out, all those tend to diminish in liminal spaces like this. And liminal spaces aren't just border spaces, they are also any in-between space that we may occupy. Like, for example, when we're somewhere between being a child and an adult, or when we're between jobs, or when a purpose or core value or relationship or institution that we hold deeply is undergoing change. We all of us occupy liminal spaces at different points of our life, and we all know, to some extent, how vulnerable we can feel in those times. I would argue that we are all of us, as people of faith and as a faith community, going through a liminal time. So we all emerge from COVID as a changed people. Even if you've never stood at a literal border crossing, we've all stood or are standing in a liminal space. It is not at all an accident that Jesus' healings, and especially today's gospel story, take place in an in-between space. I think it says something about the nature of God and God's power in our lives. There's a reason why thin places, places where the veil between God and earth is lifted or porous, tend to be places on the edge of things, cliffs, mountains, by water, or a dramatic change in landscape. God is not limited by the social or political or geographical boundaries that we seek to place on ourselves and on other people. God's power transcends all that, and God is consistently, and often, as in today's gospel, literally, alongside the people and the places on the margins of society, transforming forbidden wastelands into sacred spaces. God actually enters intentionally into the spaces on the margins, on the edges, the spaces where we feel vulnerable and uncertain. Those are places where God always is, and where God's grace is always to be found. Always, for all people on the margins, in liminal spaces in their life and for the world. And that's as true for us and where we are in our own lives as it is for Jesus and the people he heals. Perhaps it is precisely because they are in a liminal space, where the normal social boundaries fade away, that the 10 lepers in today's gospel even have the courage to approach Jesus at all. If they were within the usual boundaries of society, a group of lepers wouldn't be allowed to approach people publicly for fear of spreading their illness. But in this space, these lepers are no longer bound by the societal expectations that would keep them apart from others, and they are free in this space from any fear of holding back. And they don't hold back. In Luke's gospel, there are only 3 characters who ever call Jesus by name, who ever call him Jesus. Those characters are all people who Jesus either heals or forgives: the blind beggar, the penitent criminal, and these 10 lepers. These lepers also call Jesus Master, which is usually a title given to Jesus by his disciples. In today's gospel, as in other healings of Jesus, those being healed are not mere recipients of Jesus' healing powers. They are partners, disciples alongside of Jesus in their own healing. These lepers approach Jesus. They call him by name. They come to him, and they come to him as if they know him, faithful, expecting, trusting that their healing is both possible and at hand. And it's not just that Jesus enters into liminal spaces where he sees and hears those in need, but those in need also see and speak up to Jesus, or someone speaks up for those in need who cannot speak for themselves. To quote one biblical scholar, healing takes place not by some miracle, but by an act of mutual agency, divinely grounded, leading to authentic human connection. Put another way, we don't have to wait around passively for Jesus to come to us in our distress, in our vulnerability and pain. We can always come to him, or speak up for those who cannot come to him. And in fact, it is in that mutual meeting, Jesus hearing and seeing us, and we seeing and seeking him, for the benefit of ourselves and other people, that healing and restoration become real. Healing doesn't ever really happen in isolation, which is why political or theological positions that seek to isolate, separate, or otherwise divide people from one another cannot bring about truly just and comprehensive healing. True healing always takes place in participation in relationship and in community with other people. Healing happens in relationship with God and with others. We never do it alone by ourselves. Which means that we, all of us, have the agency and ability to be partners in our own healing and the healing of others. And the first step in that healing is as simple as acknowledging our need for healing before God and seeking and asking for God's help. That, my friends, is the first important step in healing. It's also an important part of being in relationship with God and with other people. Acknowledging our need for one another, our inherent connectedness with one another. And this connectedness goes deeper, my friends, than sometimes we can even conceive of. I don't know about you, but I sometimes hear today's gospel story and I think to myself, those ungrateful 9 other lepers who were healed, would it have killed them to say thank But here's the thing. The 9 lepers, still, just like the one who returns, they still sought out Jesus and called him by name, and they are healed. That part does not change. If a gift is made with the expectation that the recipient is somehow beholden to or less than the giver, then that, my friends, is not a true gift. Saying thank you is a polite and gracious thing to do. But the fact that the other 9 don't say thank you to Jesus in no way changes the fact that they are healed, renewed, and restored. It does not change the gift that God gives them or their worthiness to receive it. The gifts of grace and healing God gives are in no way contingent upon appropriate gratitude and subservience in return. But what is different for the Samaritan man who returns to thank Jesus is that this man acknowledges and gives thanks for the relationship that he now shares with God, with Jesus. And bear in mind, my friends, that he is a Samaritan man. The depths of healing that he has experienced by the grace of God extend beyond the physical healing of his leprosy. They extend to his relationship with Jesus. They extend also to Jesus' relationship with him. And indeed, the healing power of this miracle extends even to us as disciples of Jesus. And this is where what we might think of as just a simple, isolated, physical healing by Jesus becomes a truly stunning example of the grace and healing power of God working in our lives. The fraught relationship between Samaritans and Judeans, the fraught relationship between 2 peoples, even if it is simply in this one relationship between Jesus, a Jew, and this man, a Samaritan, that whole messy, painful history between their 2 peoples, that itself, for these 2 men, in this moment, has also been healed, restored, and made new. Jesus, the Samaritan man, the man's physical ailment, all that has been healed, but also the brokenness of the relationship between them, in their society, indeed between their 2 peoples. All of it is made whole in this moment, and that, my friends, is true healing. Not just physical, but also emotional, relational, and indeed spiritual. Where the boundaries, the things that separate us one from another and from God, fall away. They are no more. And we all dwell completely in the belovedness of God together, in the whole, full, grace-filled life that God wills for all of God's people. That is the kind of healing, my friends, that is offered to all of us through the grace and love of Jesus Christ. We need merely call upon him in the vulnerable spaces of our lives, come closer to God, and God comes closer to us. And in that shared relationship, our mutual healing, and indeed the healing of the whole world, is